Hey guys, what's up? Zach here from Racing Sim Tools, and today we're in ACC. We're going to be driving the Lamborghini GT3. We've been getting some questions to use the tool in Assetto Corsa, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and get a baseline setup. We're just going to do the safe preset setup. I normally like the safe over the aggressive just because I feel like it's more of a race trim type setup, so we're just going to go ahead and load it up. I think we should be good, right? Let's see. I have not played that much ACC to know. Yep. Okay. So we should be good. So we're just going to go ahead and do a few laps, but I need to start the app real fast. So let me do that. So we're just going to come in here, say ACC, and it says it's waiting. It's ready for data. So we're just going to go ahead and minimize that. We are going to go ahead and get out of these pits. Can't tell my pit limit. There we go. I have a nasty habit of getting DQ'd, so hopefully we don't do that. And I like Brands Hatch. Normally I don't do tunes here. I usually do them at Catalunya, but I just really like this track, and I just thought it was something different to switch it up. A lot of bumps though, a lot of terrain changes, so definitely have to keep that in mind when doing the setup work. This Lamborghini feels pretty good out of the box, I would say. It definitely feels like they've changed it since the 5-point tire model. Feels a little bit more stable, whereas before I felt like it really wanted to kill me on the brakes. So we're just going to do this, get another lap or two. Try to give it a little bit of a coast there. Back on the throttle. Trying to go as wide as possible. Can take a ton of curve through here. Back on the throttle. Same with this turn. Lots and lots of curb. Very flat curb, so it's pretty easy to take. I feel like this setup has probably some rebound in it too. Makes the little bit less compression, more rebound. Makes for a very compliant wheel. And the rebound helps it from springing back and unsettling the car as much. Let's do one more lap. Yeah, the car feels pretty good out of the box, I must say. Maybe a little bit on the understeery side, especially on throttle. This turn right here is always super tricky because you don't want to go too fast through there, so you want a really good exit. There's also a bump at the top of that hill. It can really unsettle the car. Alright, my favorite turn through here. You get pretty wide through there. There's some like cobblestones type terrain. Here you can't go wide, but you can take a ton of inside curb. That was very nice. A little bit oversteer through there. Got on the throttle a little bit early. A little bit understeer there too. Alright guys, this should be good for our first lap. Let's go ahead and pause the game and see where we're at. So we are going to go ahead and pull up the tool, and with everything, the very first thing we need to do is do the car parameters. You can see here the front and rear longitudinal slip graph is blank, and that's just because we don't have anything for here yet. So I already have a setup, but I think these tires are 690 700, so let's plug that in. And what we want to see is that when we're on the straight here, that they're pretty much 0% slip, but you're not really going to have much slip on the straight. And you can see right here the front wheel slip is negative 0.73, rear is negative 0.61, so they're pretty close. You would notice if it was off, like if this was 670, Look, you see how the line here it's at 2.21 now instead of 0. Or if you're a little bit above it, so let's do like 720, you'll see it's underneath. So that's how you can adjust to get the tire diameters. Just play with that number until it's right on 0 when you're on a straight. And typically when you're at the end of the straight is more a little bit better, just because you're at a little bit higher speed, so you know that you're not getting any slip at all. You're pretty much at max velocity for your drag configuration. So that's going to be for that one. Let's see what else we need. So we need the wheelbase. So the wheelbase for the Lambo is right about 2.6, 1.6 on the wheel track. You can get these values on Google. Pretty much, as long as you just go to Google and type in, what car you're looking for, you're going to find the result. But most cars, especially GT3s, are going to be around 2.6 around the wheelbase, and almost all of them are 1.6 on the track. Next thing is the spring rate. So this value we are just going to be getting from the setup menu and also ARB. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm just going to say return to garage, come into setup, and it says my wheel rate is 190 on the front and 130 on the back. So let's type that in. 190 on the front and then 136 on the back. For the spring IR and the rear spring IR, we're going to look at the damper velocities to get where the travel is. The pitch and roll gradient. For the static height, that's where we're going to go to the travel graphs. But let's see what the ARB rate is. ARB rate is around 4, which is probably right around 50. And then 0 on the back. So let's just go ahead and type in here on 50. And the way I got that is most cars are going to have, especially GT3 cars, are going to have an ARB adjustment anywhere from 0 Newton millimeters all the way up to about 100 to maybe 120 Newton per millimeters. So I kind of just guessed with these games that they don't give you any units, they give you click settings. It's really hard. So if you aren't really sure about the settings, just don't look at the component wheel graphs for the ARB, because you don't know if they're going to be right. But for this, it's probably pretty close to 50, so I'm pretty secure at that. And we're going to leave the rear right where it's at. Dampeners, we cannot change an ACC, unfortunately. We don't know the values. We can change the click setting, which we can use at the histogram, but we don't know what they are, so we can't calculate the load component of that, so we just leave it blank. And then the gearing also blank, because we can't adjust that inside Assetto Corsa. Blockplan, they lock the gear ratios, so there's really no point in analyzing them, and we can't adjust them anyways. So the next thing we need to figure out is the spring IRs and the static height. So the static height is pretty easy. We just come into the damper speed graphs. We're going to come into where we were leaving the pits, more or less. And you can see right here, this is the first lap, this flat line. Most games are going to have, when you're leaving the pits, is the initial value. So you can see it's right around 13 on the front and 25 on the back. So that's going to be our static. And what that means is, for our current configuration, how much fuel we have, how much the driver weighs, there's going to be a certain initial point of where the suspension sits. And that's what we're looking for at the static height, because when we're measuring the loads, we're taking the deflection of that spring. So we need to know where that base starts at. So the front is 13. And again, we got that from the travel graph on the handling tab. And then 25 on the back. Oh, that's the wrong thing. And that's good for that. So the next thing we need is the IRs. And these are the installation ratios. They are the inverse of the motion ratios. And all a motion ratio is essentially the mechanical advantage of the suspension. So we can change the lever arm of the suspension so that with a certain wheel load, we have a certain amount of spring deflection, and that can change based on the design of the car. So for some cars, you might have a really small or really stiff spring, but you might have a lot of movement in the wheel. So it just kind of depends on the design. But the best way to calculate that, and again, it's going to affect our graphs for the arrow, is to come into suspension. And we're going to look at pitch and roll gradients. And we know that the roll gradient should be right around, for most GT3 cars, anywhere from -0.3 upwards to about -0.5. I wouldn't expect it to be much higher than 0.5. And another thing to think about is at 0 at a 0 longitudinal acceleration, so 0 braking or 0 throttle, the pitch more or less should be a little bit of a rake angle or at 0. So I kind of use this relationship to kind of guess what my installation ratios are. So I can just come in here, and I think this car is right around 0.7 on the back, and that should move that graph down. And you can see it's a little bit higher above 0. That's okay, because this car has a little bit of rate to it, so that's perfectly fine. And you can see my roll gradient is still the 0.3, so that's within the range, and the pitch gradient is now within the range, so that's probably pretty close. You can see if this was way off, like at 2, it really shifts that pitch gradient. And we know that 0 degrees of acceleration, we don't have 0.5 degrees of pitch. These cars they don't have a lot of rake angle built into them. So we can move this back down to 0.7. You really want to get that 0 acceleration to pretty close 0 pitch. That's more or less how I do it. And you can see this line is not very linear. The roll gradient is like a very straight line, but you can see the pitch gradient it's initially a straight line, and then after 0 it like flattens out, and that's the car actually hitting the bump stops. ACC, they really utilize the front bump stops to control the ride height of the front splitter. And the reason they do this is the front splitter is really sensitive to changes in ride height. That front splitter wants to operate in a very specific ride height to optimize the amount of downforce it's producing. So a lot of times they don't want to do it with springs, so what they do is they use the bump stops, which is a progressive spring load, and that way they keep that ride height of that splitter exactly where they want to keep it. But for now, these parameters are pretty much set. So if we come back in here, we have our tire diameters, we have the wheelbase, we have the front track, suspension set based on our setup, spring IRs are set based on the pitch and roll gradients. The static height, we can look at the damper travel to figure out what the initial default position for a certain weight for a fuel load. Front ARB, again, anywhere from 0 to 120, 150 on the front. So we just take that, divide by the number of clicks. So we had four clicks. So that's probably right around 50 newtons per millimeter. The transition speeds we're going to leave for now. The rear ARB, we didn't have anything on there. Dampeners and gearing, we can't change. So our setup is pretty much entered now. So let's go ahead and analyze everything. So again, when I do my setup work, I like to have a notepad open. So I have notepad open here, and I'm just going to call this the default setup. And we're just going to write some observations in here. Again, when you're going through the data, sometimes you can kind of forget things, and if you write it down, sometimes you can see reoccurring themes, and there's certain things you can do to help alleviate those issues. So first thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to come in here and look at my damper histograms. I pretty much always start with my damper histograms, and there's a different philosophy to it, but I just feel like that's a area of an improvement that usually you can make pretty quickly. So looking at here, you can see, looking at the 0 node, the 0 node on the front is 17%. On the rear, it's only 7%. So it's much higher on the front than the back, and that just means the front is a lot stiffer, and you can see that a lot in the shape of the histogram too. So you see on the front how it has a little bit more of a slope. It's a little more narrow, whereas the rear you can see is a little more fat and it's kind of elongated. So what this means is there's a lot of different velocities our rear suspension is seeing, and that's just because the rear is very soft. So what we can note from this is if we increase the spring on the rear and maybe increase some of the dampening, it's going to bring this 0 node up and bring it more aligned with the front. And we want the front and rear to be pretty close, but you always want the front to be a little bit higher. That's just going to give us a little bit more grip on the rear tires, so that when we apply throttle on corner exit, we're not going to get oversteer. If they were pretty much exactly even, you more or less would probably get some oversteer as soon as you apply throttle if you're at your max cornering lateral G for the tire. So one thing we notice is the rear histograms. So I call them the spring histograms, spring dampeners, because they're both telling you the spring stiffness and the dampener bump to rebound bias, but it looks soft compared to the front. And then the second thing is on the rear, you can see they're pretty much symmetric around the 0, but on the front, you see how the bars to the left are a little bit steeper, and on the right, they're a little bit more progressive. And if you look at the speeds right here, the average for the rebound low speed is -10, and the bump is 11.3. So this means our rebound is stiffer on the front than the bump, and this is pretty typical for high downforce cars where you really want the splitter to be sucked down to the ground. But I find for myself, I really like these GT3 cars to be balanced. So I'm gonna say the front has a rebound bias, and most likely what we're going to do is we're going to decrease the rebound or increase the bump to get them more symmetric. And you don't always want to get the histogram symmetric, but it's a really good starting point. So what I recommend is getting them symmetric and then adjusting them based on feel after that. So looking at the FFT is just the Fourier transform of the damper histogram velocities, and it's going to tell you more or less if something's overdamped or underdamped. So you can see how the peak up here on the rear left, rear right is around 20 and the front is 10. Well, again, if we look at the histograms, the rear is very soft compared to the front. So we probably have some undamped motion there, which is why these peaks are a little bit higher. So 3 is the rear is slightly underdamped when compared to the front. And again, typically you want the rear to be a little bit softer than the front, but it's just something that we might try. Pitch and roll gradients. Again, the car is pretty stiff. It's 0.33 degrees per G. That's right within the range of what I would expect it to. I typically like my cars to be about 0.4. So this is a little bit soft, or a little bit stiff to me, which just means the car is going to respond really fast to my inputs. And the reason I like it to be around 0.4 is the car will be a little bit slower to my inputs, and I like to kind of not sawtooth the wheel, but I like to feel the grip. So if it's really stiff like it is right now, what happens is when I'm feeling for the grip, it can unsettle the car. So I like to make it a little bit softer. On the pitch gradient, it's right around 0.2, which is pretty good, but you can see we're not getting much play when we go into the negative acceleration for longitudinal. And again, negative longitudinal acceleration is braking. And again, it's engaging the bump stop. So you can see how it's a straight line up until 0, and then after 0, it flattens out. That just means we're really on the bump stops there. So we might think about increasing the bump stop gap just to give us a little bit more play. So I'm just going to say the bump stop gap is short, always engaged. And again, this is pretty common with downforce cars that have a splitter. But one thing I've noticed is a lot of these cars in Assetto Corsa aren't as aero dominant as some of the devs have claimed to be. So I actually take a different setup approach, and I think it's worked pretty well. And I'm actually going to show it to you guys after we analyze all these things. So the next thing is traction circle. Traction circle is going to tell us how many lateral G's and how much longitudinal G's we're pulling in a turn. So you can see laterally we're pulling about 2 G's, and on braking we're pulling about 2 G's. So that's probably the limit of the tires in Assetto Corsa for these GT3 cars. And we want to try to maximize how far out we are. So we want to try to maintain 2 G's at all time. You can see right here when I'm doing a little bit of braking and a little bit of cornering, I'm right around -1 and -1 right here, which the combined G is going to be really close to 2 G's there. So I'm really driving this car at its limit. One thing I want to point out, and it is talking about the arrow that I just talked about, is the top right graph. This is the longitudinal acceleration as a function of speed. And you can see right here, there's a little bit of a slope. So you can see there's a little bit of change in speed. So as we go up in speed, we're able to brake harder. We're able to have more longitudinal acceleration on braking. The problem is you want this typically to have a more of a slope. You can see right here it's pretty narrow, and all that means is we're not gaining as much braking force that we can with speed. So that just means these cars are probably not as aero dominant as we may think. And then let's see, I don't really look at this graph, so you'll see that there's like modes and other graphs here. I don't typically look at those graphs, so a lot of people when they load up this tool they get kind of overwhelmed by how much data there is, but you don't need to look at everything. And my kind of baseline workflow that I'm showing you guys here, I don't look at these things. I will typically look at these things for like an LMP car where the heave motion or the roll, we want to get it really specific, but again these cars don't have a lot of aero to them, so again, we don't need to spend a lot of time there. Gearing, we can't really do anything here. Again, we can't change the gear ratios. Aero, ACC doesn't support any of the aero channels. We will have center of pressure and downforce. Again, these are measured kind of an estimation, but if we just look here at the long straight, which is more or less the best place to look at these things, you can see our center of pressure goes from 70, right around 70, I would say it's hovering. So that's percent rearward, so it's a pretty stable aero platform. It might be giving us a little bit of understeer. I think the default setup has quite a lot of rear wing on it, so we could decrease that rear wing. But what I'm probably going to do is, if I look at these things, it says the rear spring is soft, the rear is slightly underdamped. That's telling me that I'm probably going to increase the rear stiffness, so I might still want that rear downforce just to give me a little bit more force, normal force on those tires. Temps we can't really do in ACC. We can do the brake temps, but I normally don't mess with them unless I'm getting a large pressure change in the tires. Typically for the brakes you want them to be right around 50. The front is a little bit too closed off, and that's shifting this number upward into about 60%. So we could increase front brake duct opening or decrease the rear. So the decreasing the rear would make the rear hotter, which is going to increase the pressure in the tires on the rear. So track states. So track is basically going to tell us, what type of corners everything is. And you can see here, if we look at this pie graph, most of these corners are going to be high speed corners, but we still have a decent amount of low speed corners. And again, with these cars, they don't have a super lot of downforce, so it's really not going to play that much of an effect. If you were in like a Formula 1 car, you would definitely want to pay attention to that. Brake and throttle, we're not really going to mess with that. That's more for driver development. Diff locking is a good one to look at. So before we get to this, let's go ahead and look at the handling tab and look at the differential. So the last video, we didn't talk about the differential, but in ACC, it's a very crucial thing to tune. So one thing that the differential does is give the tire on the outside a little bit more torque. That way we can utilize the total available grip on the rear axle a little bit better. And it does this by changing how much it lets the inside tire rotate compared to the outside. A limited slip differential will be locked until a certain amount of torque difference is seen at the differential, and then what will happen is it'll allow it to slip a little bit so that it doesn't scrub as much. In ACC, we can't change the number of clutches or the power or coast ramp angles, but we can change the preload. So that's that value of at the certain value at which the differential starts allowing slip. And the way we can see that is by looking at the driven wheels. So this is a rear-wheel drive car, so it says the rear axle, and anytime this line is at 0, it means the differential is locked. So you can see on the straight, it's pretty much locked. But maybe mid corner, let's do like a really tight turn. So right here, Druids, you can see this is a really tight turn, and the value here on this third graph is no longer 0, and that just means the differential is unlocking and allowing that inside tire to turn a little bit more. So looking at this line, you can see there's quite a bit of unlocking, but it's a little bit easier to tune, I think, if you look at the new track and differential. So the values here are 0%, again, is locked, and then the yellow is 5% of unlocking. So the inside tire is turning 5% different speed than the outside tire, and the red is 10%. So you can see we're not getting a lot of unlocking, where it's just fully allowing it to rotate, but we are getting a little bit. And if you look here, it's a common reoccurring theme. These really tight corners right here, druids, this tight turn is where we have a little bit more of unlocking. You can still see here at these high speed turns we have a little bit, but it's a lot less. And sometimes, like this value right here, this is where I cut the corner, and I'm probably getting a little bit of the terrain, so that differential is unlocking. So I can adjust the preload here to basically see that I'm getting unlocking on these tight turns, and then pretty much constant on these high speed turns. Because if your differential is unlocking on these high speed turns, what you're gonna get is a lot of power on understeer. If it remains locked on these high speed turns, then you're probably going to have a little bit of power on oversteer. And again, it's just because when the differential is locked, it's sending more torque to the outside tire, which has more grip. So it's a little bit better to do that, to send more torque out to that tire that has more normal load on it. So one thing I noticed here is we have quite a bit. I would like to see a little bit more unlocking here. Just a little bit. I would like to see this a little bit more drawn out, just so when I get on the throttle I don't get oversteer. A lot of times in drills you can see how the differential is locked right here. I get a little bit of understeer, and that's, or oversteer, sorry, and that's just because that differential is locked. So I'm gonna decrease the preload so I get more unlocking. And again, the differential is probably the most driver specific setup adjustment you can make. So it really depends on how you want your cars to feel. But if you like a little bit more power on oversteer, maybe a little bit more locking. If you feel like the car is a little bit too much oversteer, then a little bit less unlocking will do you really good. So the next thing to look at is the braking, how much wheel lock we have, and the percent of wheel slip from the front compared to the rear. That's going to adjust the balance of the car. And we basically, what we want is the front and the rear to lock up at the same time. That means we're utilizing the total maximum amount of grip. Think about it. If the front locks up before the rear, that means we've exceeded the total grip on the rear, and that's kind of limiting us, even though the rear still has some grip to give. So again, if we lock them up at the same time, we're utilizing all the available grip on both tires. So I like to look at, you know, these really deep braking zones. Trying to think where I brake really hard. Maybe at the end of this turn is a really good one to look at. And typically, to look at more than one is ideal, but I'm trying to keep this video short. And if I show you guys how to analyze one corner, you'll be able to apply it to other corners as well. But let's look at this turn. So I'm looking up here on the right at the front wheel slip, the front right wheel slip, rear left and rear right. I'm looking at the front is always a little bit higher here. So you can see I'm still got a little bit more wheel slip on the front compared to the rear. Here's a little bit less. This turn has a little bit of an incline, so I'm probably locking up as I go over that, but it's not bad. If the front was a lot higher than the rear, like maybe 5% higher than the rear, then I would definitely change it. But these brake biases are set pretty darn good, so I'm probably not going to mess with it that much. But let's look at wheel slip, or the traction control. So the traction control, we can see that in the rear wheel slip graphs. If they go below the 0 line, that's acceleration slip. And you can see how this is jaggedy right here. That means that's probably where we're kicking in, and the traction control is limiting the tire wheel speed to keep us from losing it. So let's look how many times we see that getting engaged. So a little bit here, but not a lot. Maybe a little bit here. None right there. That's a pretty good corner. This one I'm getting a lot right here. Again, that's probably that bump at the top of the hill. The tires is completely gone right there. But I'm probably gonna decrease traction control just a little bit. And again, decreasing that traction control just a little bit is gonna help quite a bit. just give me a little bit more oversteer on the corner exit. One thing I forgot to mention on the damper histograms that we're going to compare the high speed and low speed is I didn't tell you guys the section down here is the low speed section. So near the zeroed node is low speed. Typically these cars are going to have a transition speed of anywhere from 40 to maybe 60 millimeters per second. But you can see down here how you would want this to be pretty much a trend downwards, where it's not a linear trend, but you know, the relationship is pretty much the same. There's a curve to it. You can see right here that, you know, there's this peak. The higher speed peak is higher than the lower speed, and that just means we probably have some undampened motion in the high speed range. So if we come to the damper speeds here, you're gonna see here I hit like a curb or something, and you can see these are some high speed oscillations right here, and you can see that they're pretty high. So we're up in sometimes the 500 millimeters per second. So I'm probably going to increase that the high speed dampening just a little bit. And what I'm really looking for when I adjust them is I want this trend to be nice and smooth downward, so it's pretty much consistent, so that you don't have, like, as you go to the left or go to the right, you don't have these nodes that are higher than the one before it. Again, we're looking for a very symmetric histogram here. So we're gonna go ahead and make these adjustments here, and we're gonna just say change high speed dampening to make histogram smooth. All right, so quite a few adjustments here. Again, we noticed that the rear spring was soft, the front has a rebound bias, the rear is slightly underdamped when compared to the front. The bunt stop gap on the front is always engaged. We want to increase that front duct just a little bit more. We might want to decrease the preload. We're getting a lot of locking, and I want a little bit more unlocking just to help out of druids. We need to decrease that traction control just a little bit. It's getting engaged pretty much all the time, and we want to make sure that it's not. We only want to engage the traction control to save us when we're really getting into a sticky situation. And we want to change that high speed dampening to make the histogram smooth. So I've already gone ahead and done a setup for this. So I'm just going to load this, and we're just going to talk about some of the things that I've changed here. So again, I lowered that traction control. The mechanical grip, I stiffened that rear up. I stiffened it up quite a bit to 191 Newton meters, and that might seem like a lot, but the reason why is, you remember how I said that the rear is under dampened? When I was looking at how the car is behaving, there was a lot of oscillations in there. So if I look at the damper histogram, you see it's really a wide range, and that just means we're getting a lot of weight transfer there, and it's really soft, so it's getting a lot of play in that rear suspension. So what I actually did, and again, the cars aren't as downforce dominant as may one think, I decreased this rear ride height to 65 millimeters, and what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to stiffen up the rear a lot. And the nice thing about that is I will still have the same oversteer to understeer characteristics because I've decreased the rear ride height, which is going to decrease the total amount of lateral load transfer, but I've increased the rear stiffness to give me a little bit more ride, so that the rear is not so soft. Dampeners, same thing. We basically decreased the slow rebound just a little bit from the default. We've increased the rear bump and rebound quite a bit, and then we just adjusted the fast rebound upwards because that's where we were getting those undampened motions that I was pointing out. So we just increased that fast rebound just a little bit. Mechanical grip, same thing. We did increase this bump stop range quite a bit. Again, we were always engaging them, and you can see that again in the pitch and roll gradients. This is normally a linear trend. You can see it's got a curve to it, so that's where we're hitting the bump stops. So we just increased that quite a bit. And that's pretty much it, guys. So we're just going to go ahead and load this back up, and we're going to do another lap, and then we're going to compare the data that we've collected with what we had on the baseline. So again, we're just going to do some laps here. And if you guys have any questions or anything, just please let me know. I know these videos, they can be a little bit long, and it's because I want you guys to see my thought process while I go through the data. I'm not showing you guys all the trial and error. When I come up with these tunes, there's a lot of trial and error, because when you adjust a lot of these setups, you're gonna adjust more than what you think. And if I were to include all of that, then this would be like a 3-hour video. But if you have any questions, please let me know and we will address it. But the car is already feeling really, really good. It's a lot more settled, even though we have a rear, a much stiffer rear. The change in center of pressure is a lot more consistent because the rear is not so soft and so compliant. So I'm just warming up the tires right now. I'm not trying to push or anything, but I already feel a lot more confident in this car. Can really ride these curbs. I love that last turn. The last turn is so much fun, especially when you have a good car like this. It's really dialed in. All right, here we go, guys. We're braking on the throttle. Nice exit through there. Can really brake late here through Drudge just because it's uphill. We have a lot more braking ability. Trying to get as wide as possible. I overslowed just a little bit through there. That was just a driver mistake, though. Car is feeling really good. I can be really aggressive on my braking. A little bit oversteer there, but we were able to keep it together, no problem. I got on that inside curb just a little bit and applied throttle and got a little bit loose. Alright, we are finishing this up. Went a little bit wide there, but you can see how much curb I took there. And the car was not really unsettled, hardly at all. And that's just because we increased that that high-speed rebound just a little bit. So what happens is the high-speed bump is so soft that the car compresses, the wheel is very compliant, and then the rebound keeps it from springing up. And you actually see that a lot in rally cars when they have a lot of tracks where they do a lot of jumps. They actually have that so that the car will squat down essentially and kind of thud down, if that makes sense. But here we go. We have the data. So we're just going to go ahead and load the parameters up. I've already created the car parameters. Again, if you have any questions, just in the comments in the video down below, just let me know. I'll try to answer them as much as possible. I get pretty busy, but if I don't answer your question, which I will try to answer everyone's question, reach out to us on the Discord. The link to the Discord will be in the link description down below. But we have everything loaded in here. So I just loaded it in, and then we can go ahead and start looking at the data. So first thing we're going to look at is the damper histogram. And you can already tell that the rear looks a lot better, not nearly as soft as the rear. The zero node is still a little bit less than the front node, just like we'd want. 15% up front, 11% on back, but it's a lot more in the ballpark. And then again, remember how we are having some of those nodes in the high speed range look a little bit offset. We've increased that rear or the high speed dampening, which is really smoothing it out. So you can kind of see there's some peaks here. And basically we just increased that rebound. It's made it a lot more of a trend downwards, if that makes sense, as you get across from the zero node. These white dash lines are just depicting where the transition speed, I believe, is at. I don't know for these cars, again, that it's not stated anywhere, but you can kind of see right around 50 millimeters per second the trend changes. So there's a difference in dampening, and typically that's where the transition speed is at. But damper histograms look night and day different. So this is the default. This is after we added it. So what we did is, again, we decreased the front rebound. Here you have a little bit of a rebound bias. Here we just made them more squared up, and on the rear we increased the spring and the dampening to make it a little bit more aligned. So let's just go ahead and look at the FFT. Here's the standard. So the standard is 10 up front. On the back, it's 20. As we increase that rear dampening, we got the rear back down to 10. The front's around 10. So we have about the same level of dampening all around, which is really good. Pitch and roll gradients. We did decrease the rear ride height, which if you look, you can see here for the same IR ratio, it's a little bit higher, and that's just because the car had a little bit more rake in it. We dropped the rear quite a bit, six millimeters on the rear, and you can see it dropped it down, but our roll gradient decreased because of that, and that's just because the car's not going to pitch as much when we hit those brakes, because the pitch is a little bit more aligned. We're a little bit more flat with the car, and as you look at the roll gradient, it's pretty much the same. 333 on the default, 335 on the adjusted one. The car is now pulling more lateral G's than we were before. So this scale changes, but you can see on the default we're pulling about negative 2 G's or 2 G's laterally, about 2 G's longitudinally. Oh, and then also one thing to note is the slope of the graph, right? For the braking as we increase in speed. If we look at what we have now, we're getting 2.5. And then some of these turns we're getting 3 G's, and we're getting a little bit above 2 G's now on the braking, which is a lot better. Here we're right around 2 G's. Here it's a little bit above 2 G's. And if you look at the longitudinal acceleration versus speed, we're getting a much better slope now. So our arrow is acting a little bit better. And that, again, that I think is because we stiffen up the rear, so the rear is not it's not moving as much. So our rake angle is not moving as much. So our arrow platform is a lot more stable. Let's see. Let's look at the arrow. This has probably moved back quite a bit, so I don't remember where we looked at it last time. Yeah, so we've moved it up to about 55 now. Yeah, 55, 56. So it was at 70. So it definitely did move down just a little bit, and that's just because we adjusted the rear ride height just a little bit. So next thing to look at is the differential. You can see we have more unlocking now, and that's again because we opened that preload. So as we go down in preload, we're gonna have more unlocking. As we go up in preload, we'll have more locking. So decreasing that preload allows us more unlocking. So if I come into track and I look at the differential, you can see at a Druids I have more unlocking, which is going to make me a little bit more stable now. If I analyze this again, so I can compare 2 laps. The check marked one's going to be on the outside, and mine is going to be on the inside. You can see the preload, increasing the preload gave me a little bit more unlocking. Sorry, so there should be a little bit more yellow along here. You can really tell right here I got a lot of unlocking there, and again, just decreasing that preload on that differential is going to allow more unlocking. Looking at the handling, we didn't adjust the brake bias, so that's not going to change, but let's just go ahead and look at it anyways, because we did change the rear ride height, which is going to really mess with stuff. So let's just look at, again, this turn here, just to make sure we're not too far forward, which the car felt really good, so I'm not really worried about it. You can see pretty much right here, 3.32, 3.16. They're pretty much exactly even. Again, if the rear was much higher, or I felt like the car was really oversteering, I would probably need to move it up. But the car felt really, really good, so we're not really going to mess with it. The wheel loads, we can look at that. We didn't look at it for the default. We can, go ahead and take a look though. Typically the best place to look at it is like a high speed corner, but it's kind of hard because Brands Hatch is so bumpy. There's not like a lot of really good turns to look at it for, but let's just look at this turn. This is the high speed turn, and you can see the front load is right around depending on where you check. Again, it's a really bumpy track, but we're right around 5,000 newtons on the front, 6,000 on the back. So a little bit more load on the rear left, but that's okay. Again, I wanted a little bit more oversteer built into this car. So setup is really good. We don't really need to adjust those springs anymore, or the ARBs. But that's pretty much it, guys. Again, if you guys have any questions or would like me to explain anything in a little bit more detail, please let me know. I'll try to again to explain everything in the comment description, or the comments for this video. If I don't answer it though, please reach out to us on the Discord. But in good fashion, we're gonna go ahead and do a quick little race. Alright guys, we are here in the Lamborghini at Brands Hatch in the Racing Sim Tool setup. Got a 5-minute race with 10 cars on the grid. We are in P11, I believe. Yep. So hopefully we're able to get it done here. We're gonna take it kind of easy on lap 1, just get the tires nice and toasty. I love this track. It's one of my favorite tracks in ACC, just because of all the elevation change. It can really keep you on your toes. Oh, that green flag was really slow. Got me sleeping just a little bit. It's okay. We're gonna kind of take it easy in the back here. Try to get a good run up on turn 1. Try to take this inside lane. Hopefully the boat lead gives me enough space here. We're gonna take that position. Thank you, Ferrari. Really easy to go wide here, especially on cold tires though. All right. Getting blocked by this Lexus just a little bit, but we are not quite in P6. Got her done. We are in P6 now. Use the runoff of that turn just a little bit. Let's try to close this gap to P5. Ooh, I'm really deep. Luckily, the car is really set up really well. Did not kill me on the brakes. We got a better run out of that turn. Ooh, got pushed from the inside though. We definitely lost some positions now. We're in P8. Hopefully we can make some headway and get back up there. Yeah, it's so dangerous right there, especially with these AI. They have no problem bumping you. Pull a little Leclerc on me. I was Verstappen. Luckily, I didn't go in the gravel like Verstappen did, but not ideal. Definitely lost 3 places on that. Much better run. We're going to give him plenty of room when we try to pass him up again. But I think it was the second Lexus that caused the incident.
You're at the halfway mark. Keep pushing.
Definitely a little bit faster than they are. We're definitely making some good headroom. Cut that a little bit too much. Kind of unsettled the car just a little bit. Oh man, this is bringing back memories. I'm gonna give them a little bit more room. Okay, that's how it happened last time, but they just booted me right there. Let's see if we can pass them on a little bit less sketchy place.
Well done, mate. Go for lap.
He's right on our butt. Got it done though, nice and clean. Look at that mid-corner speed, just on the outside. Trying to cover that inside so he can't make a move. Alright, we're in P5. 1 minute to go. Probably one more lap after this. See if we can get one more position. Quite a gap between us and P4, but who knows. Yeah, one more lap after this. I don't know, we might be able to get another position or two. We'll have to see. Getting put into the gravel really hurt us. Yeah, final lap. I think we can get 2 more positions out of here.
Fastest lap of the race, man. Good job.
Oh yeah, so much speed through there. We're gonna try to do it on the outside for the Mercedes. This is super dangerous. Little contact there. Got her done though. Alright, come on, let's get this ass in. You're right there. Jaguar, come on. We're gonna take the inside. Yeah, the inside on that turn is definitely not where you want to be. Can't find a place to pass. Alright, coming up to the last turn. Come on. Got a little bit of oversteer there. Just trying to push a little bit too hard. Broke really deep into the turn. Oh, we might do it on the last turn. Yep, there we go. That's what's up right there. That was awesome. I was able just to plant the throttle on that last turn. And we got P3 out of that. I will take that. Really good drive. So we went from P10 to P3. Not a bad drive, especially for getting pitted by one of the Lexus. But that's going to be it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll put timestamps. Again, if you want to join the Discord, I'll be able to answer any questions you might have. I will also try to answer any questions you have in the comments down below. But if you like this channel, please, or this video, please give it a like and give the channel a subscribe if you haven't already. Any kind of activity really helps us get noticed. But that's going to be it, guys. Have a good night. I will see you guys next weekend.